Hello there. Welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, dreaming up my books. And today I'm going to continue to read excerpts from my novels. This time we are working on Painful Medicine, which is the final installment of the Crucible Spirals Trilogy. This is how it concludes, folks. So I'm going to take a bit from the very early part. I know it looks big. Don't worry, it's fun. And the font size is large. I actually did that purposely. It was a promise I had made. So I like to keep my word. So I'm just going to read a few pages from Painful Medicine so that you can see what the writing style is like. And you could probably tell how it's evolved from Crew of Ganges. Um, that, my writing has changed and altered a little bit over time as I create new books. All right, so we're going to start right here. This is page 42. Agro Wheel 2, Level 8. It's a big ship. Novia Ling could both hear and feel the deck-shaking rumbles of the catastrophe occurring behind her. With every crashing wave of explosive sound, fear flashed through her limbs renewed, despite her exhaustion. It kept her going, forcing her to ignore the river of tears flowing down her cheeks. Her mother was leading the way up a steep hillside to the relative safety of the jungle at the top of the ridge that her family was climbing. Her father was right behind her, his back loaded with what possessions they needed to survive in the wilds. She could barely hear him calling encouragements to her. His voice drowned out whenever a loud bang slammed through the smoke-filled air. She loved her papa, who always called her his shining jewel, and she did her best to keep up with her mother, who carried Novia's little brother in a sling on her back. There were others around them, also fleeing their community named Leichenhold. Novia focused her eyes on the handholds that her father pointed out to her, not on the screaming and wailing families all around them. She desperately wanted to show her papa that she was brave enough to finish the climb on her own, though her limbs trembled with exhaustion and fear. She had already seen so many people die, and it was nothing like what she saw on the entertainment broadcast that she loved so much. Dyson 4 was her favorite, a science fiction show based on a traveling technological sphere with a star at its center. The crew on the broadcast always had a great plan to escape their perils, and death was rare, very clean and simple. The reality she had already faced was shocking in contrast. Their neighbor, crewman Leon Smits, had fallen from the upper reaches of the ridge they were climbing to crash to his lingering death on the boulders 50 meters below them. His agonized scream still rang in her mind. Novia had been forced by her parents to pass by the injured, many of whom were missing limbs or had their bellies torn open by flying chunks of steel and concrete from the endless blasts that were tearing their homes apart. 10 meters away, another adult had slipped and was dangling dangerously by one hand. Others climbed to rescue him, but Novia did as her papa told her to, keeping her eyes on what she was doing and never looking down or back at the disaster that had befallen their precious community. Leichenhold had been a prime example of the artistry of life in Ganges. The center of it had been taken up by the public baths, playgrounds, schools, and the entertainment venues. On the capward and sternward edges of the community, there were twin walls of apartment buildings covered in hanging gardens, so dense that one might assume that they were forested cliffs which reached 40 meters toward the sky screens. Flowers, birds, and small monkeys had been prevalent, making their homes in the lush draping greenery. The animals had been the first to disappear when the troubles had begun, leaving the residents confused and anxious. Most of the adults were posted in planetary sector as agrarian development specialists. Some were botanists from medical sector and forestry caretakers for the agro administration. All of them had brought their expertise to contribute to the living beauty of Leichenhold. Now her lovely community was shattered and burning behind her. The unfairness of it gripped her heart like a vice, and she could not understand why anyone would tear her home down. She had overheard one old woman state that they were lucky, that the enemy was not hunting them down, focused as they were on killing the security sector forces that had arrived at Leichenhold, within pollen slivers of their opponent's arrival at the outskirts of the community. Novia wasn't sure that she would call anything that had happened this rotation as being lucky, but some of the other grown-ups had agreed with the old woman. Her papa had explained to her that the mutineers would have burned Leichenhold to the deck, killing all of the residents if security had not arrived, giving the people a chance to escape destruction. Novia did not understand why anyone would rebel against the holy mission. Since she was 4 spirals old, she had decided that she would be a botanist when she finished her schooling. 2 more spirals of education had only cemented her resolve even further, and she was taught by her parents and teachers that it was good to have a purpose in life beyond one's own desires. To her young mind, the strifers were kind of scary, but mostly annoying when they interrupted her favorite classes or broadcasts with their screaming messages. Why anyone would join with them to stop the holy mission was beyond her understanding. Scrambling over a ledge, she heard her mother call out that they were almost at the top of the ridge. Her father had caught up with Novia, sweating with the strain of his loaded back. She looked at her papa and noticed that his hands were bleeding. He smiled brightly at her. "Do not worry, my little jewel. I will heal. Keep going, my brave flower. Keep climbing. We are almost there." Novia heard her little brother wailing piteously from his swaddling sling. At only 2 spirals old, he would never remember Leichenhold, nor this flight to safety. She would have to do that for him, by never forgetting where they had come from nor why they had been forced to flee. She reached the next natural handholds and was very glad that she had taken up cliff climbing at school. At the time, she had figured it would be a handy skill to master so she could better understand the flora that grew on the mountainsides. She had never expected the skill to save her life. She looked up to see her mother reaching down with one hand stretched toward her. Novia had always thought that her mother was the most beautiful person in all of Ganges, even when she was very angry. Now her mother looked frantic and disheveled, glancing frequently into the distance, her eyes wide with horror. Novia scrambled up the rock face as swiftly as she could. Her father was just behind her, as if protecting her. His breathing was labored, and she feared for her papa, for he was terribly unbalanced by the load on his back. Everywhere around her, people were shouting, climbing, and struggling to reach the summit. Acrid smoke was beginning to make breathing difficult, hitting them in waves of scorched chemicals. Her mother was finally able to grasp her wrists, dragging Novia up to the top of the ridge. They both whimpered in unison as they pulled until she landed hard on her knees, scraping them on the hard rock. Her mother immediately reached down again to help to pull up Novia's father to the top. She tried to help her mother, but she was pushed back with a stern warning to stay where she was. Her papa was almost dragged onto his belly to the edge of the cliffside, and he crawled the rest of the way with a groan of pain. Novia watched as he collapsed upon the rocky ground, the loaded pack almost slipping from his shoulders. Her mother rushed over to him and checked his wounds with tears spilling from her eyes. Novia turned to face the way that they had come, and stood frozen in horror at the destruction before her. The valley below made her community look like a small muddle, with the main roads clogged with vehicles. In the near distance, the twin apartment blocks were burning. Large portions of them had already collapsed into the central space of the community, crushing the baths and the school buildings. On either side of Leichenhold were ragged lines of grumbling war machines, and she watched them relentlessly fire upon each other, using the remaining structures as cover. Blasts of flame and smoke came from the nozzles of the turrets of the tank divisions, followed slowly after by the echoing boom of their main guns firing. Chunks of building were torn apart as beams of piercing blue light cut through the walls as if they were made of paper. With morbid curiosity, she watched as several streams of smoke approached the cliff below her. She had never seen anything like it before. With a bone-shaking crash, the billowing lines of soot hit the rock face, and explosions rocked the ground under her feet, causing her to fall hard to her knees on the ridge top. Screams ripped at her ears following the blast, as several of those still climbing the cliff were tossed into the air like toy figurines. Some were engulfed in flames as they fell to their deaths on the rocks below. Novia sat there trembling, unable to make her limbs move. She desperately wanted to close her eyes to the terrible sights before her, but her body refused to obey. Her mother swept her up into her arms, turning her face away from the sight. Someone nearby shouted, "They're shooting at us! Quickly, into the forest!" Novia's father took her from her mother's arms, and together her family raced into the tree line just a few meters away. Scorched flesh filled her nose, along with other very unpleasant smells. Smoke filled the air as they all raced into the dense jungle. Several times her papa's overloaded backpack got caught in the tangle of branches, and Novia had to help him to get free. This forest was familiar to her, as she had been on school field trips to the surrounding landscape. She had duly noted which of the plants were edible, which were poisonous, and the ones used for medicinal purposes. She quickly lost sight of the majority of the other refugees in the thick woodland, though she could still hear their screams, cries for help, and hysterical shrieks of mourning. All right, now I'm not going to complete that entire thing, only because there are too many spoilers going on there, which is great, you know. Uh, so that is all happening, just to give you a little context, within a spaceship. That's not happening on a planet. It's not happening on a moon. It's not happening in some kind of dome thing. No, no, no. This is inside the spaceship Ganges. It is that big. Um, and being able to bring this kind of action and intensity into that setting has been a real joy for me. Um, I hope that you enjoyed that little demonstration of what is to be found within painful medicine, which is the conclusion of the Crucible Spirals. So next time I will be reading an excerpt from Tales from the Age of Unity, which is my collection of short stories based on the same ship, but occurring well before the Crucible Spirals Trilogy begins. So that you get an idea about the culture that existed in the ship before it changed during the revolution that was going on within the ship. So I do hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you check in next week. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. I would really love to see more subscribers, although I'm very happy with the ones I have. Thank you. Thank you all. You are all wonderful. Thank you for subscribing, and thank you for watching. And I do hope you enjoyed. All right. I'll see you next week. Hang in there.